Shabbat Shalom, everybody. I think we all know from our own life experience that sometimes we're in a crisis, and in response to that crisis, some good things emerge. And we find ourselves wondering, when the crisis is over, are those good things that emerged going to remain? So I want to take us back a couple of years. Towards the beginning of the COVID pandemic, the Israeli singer and songwriter Hanan Ben-Ari wrote a song about how COVID affected society. He called it Ga'aguim Livnei Adam. People yearn for people. And he said this reminded us of how much we need each other. People were a little bit kinder. We understood that we can't take human interaction for granted. And he wondered, when this is over, are we going to continue to be a little kinder, a little gentler, a little bit more focused on what really matters? Or are we going to go back to business as usual? And he ended his song, I hope when all of this ends, shelo nihiyeh shuv oto hadavar, that we won't once again be as we were. So I want to ask the same question about the crisis that Israel is going through and about the crisis that American Jews and Jews throughout the world have been feeling right now. We have seen that in the course of responding to this crisis in Israel and throughout the world, that actually some good things have emerged, and I'm going to take a look at some of them. And the question is, will those good things remain? Or will we somehow go back to business as usual? One of the good things that's emerged, and people have said this to me and observed this, is that you see that there's greater unity among Israelis and greater unity among Jews outside of Israel as well. One of the things that will never change is that my tallis falls off while I'm giving a sermon. Thank you all for your patience. Israelis are experiencing unity that they had not experienced, certainly for the months leading up to October 7th. Israelis were calling each other names across an ideological divide. Israelis were saying, you're a traitor, and the person would say back, no, you're a traitor. And I recently saw a beautiful video that was put out by Eretz Nehederet, which is an Israeli comic troupe that do really funny satire about Israeli life. And they have a woman who's like the bus counselor, and she's blowing her whistle and inviting the different groups onto the bus. So she says, fascists, come on board. So the fascists come on board. Anarchists, come on board. The anarchists come on board. Privileged Ashkenazis, come on board. The privileged Ashkenazis come on board. Right wing, left wing, you get the idea. But the reason why this is, funny, but also profound, is that the message of the video is that we're all on the same bus. That's the message of the video. Those of us who months ago were calling each other names are realizing that we have to rely upon each other. And you may know that this group, Achim Leneshek, who was vociferously critical of many things that the Israeli government was doing, that they are now the core of collecting things and of helping Israeli society through this crisis. Here in the United States, we've seen unity down in Washington at rallies that are taking place across the country. Jewish people who until recently have been vilifying each other are saying, gee, maybe we need to be literally and metaphorically on the same bus. And the question is, God willing, when the crisis is behind us, when some of this, God willing, has been alleviated, what's going to happen next? Are we going to retain a sense of unity, Or are we going to go back to vilifying each other? It's fine to disagree, we will continue to, but will we still resort to insinuating that the other person doesn't just disagree with me, the other person is evil, the other person is unworthy? And so I voice my hope, riffing on the words of the singer Hanan Ben Ari, that we will not go back to things as they were. Second area, which is really fascinating, the response of Palestinians living in Israel and also living in Gaza and on the West Bank. Now, much of the response, sadly, upsettingly, has been to support Hamas through their barbaric travesty. But there has been increasingly voices of those who are speaking out against Hamas, who are recognizing that hitching their future to Hamas is not the answer. When we were in Israel just last week, we met with an educator at an organization called Encounter that brings Israelis and Palestinians together. And this educator said that a friend of hers, a Palestinian woman from the West Bank, wrote to her and expressed her horror and her condolences and said, they don't act in my name, they don't act on behalf of Islam as I observe it. And she told a story about her son, her 19-year-old son, which impacted me enormously. She said when her 19-year-old son found out what happened on October 7th, he was so outraged that this was done by Hamas, that this was done by anyone claiming to represent the Palestinian cause, that he couldn't even speak. And he just started yelling, and he started literally banging his head against the wall. A 19-year-old. I look at these responses and I say to myself, what will be, God willing, when the crisis is behind us? Will there be voices of courage within Palestinian communities that will recognize that lo zeh haderech, that Hamas in their barbarity is not the pathway forward, not for Israel and not for them? Third area has to do with our college students. So there's no one here who is unaware of what's been going on college campuses right now. It is frightening. Our Jewish students on many college campuses literally don't feel safe. They exchange WhatsApps about when they can cross campus and about which building they can go into and which building they should stay away from. What we've seen is that as a result of this, our college students have actually stepped up. They are learning more about Zionism, about Israel's history. They are stepping forward and advocating for themselves and for other Jewish students on campus. I want to share with you that just 2 days ago, Thursday night, I had a Zoom call with our college students and our grad students, and Jonathan Greenblatt, CEO of the ADL, was gracious enough to come on and to listen and to offer incredibly important resources and support to our students. So I just want to share with you, without mentioning the campuses or the names, because I told everybody on that call that what was shared, they could feel free to share without having it necessarily repeated. But just the things that are taking place. So one student described how the Hillel and his university told the Hillel students that they shouldn't hang up posters about freeing the hostages because nothing pertaining to the war should be hung up. So these students who were hanging up pictures that said, keep so-and-so in your prayers with a picture of the hostages, they were told to take those down, along with the students that were hanging up posters that were vilifying Israel and that had messages that were frankly anti-Semitic. So that's bananas that these two were equated, hanging up a poster that is anti-Semitic with hanging up a poster that's saying praying for the well-being of hostages. That's one campus. Another described being on a team with somebody who was making comments that crossed the line from pro-Palestinian to anti-Semitic, and how disturbing that was, and how the coach was not as helpful as the coach should have been. A third described having a teaching assistant who, in her correspondence, incorporates the phrase "from the river to the sea." This is a teaching assistant at a university in her academic capacity, incorporating that as part of her correspondence. A fourth described how after a vigil that was held on campus by the Jewish students, that a number of students in the middle of the night wrote anti-Semitic messages in chalk in the spot where the pro-Israel release the hostages vigil had taken place the night before. And of the students who spoke, they all expressed feeling insufficiently supported by the administrations at their respective universities. Obviously, this is deeply troubling. Obviously, this is deeply frustrating. And what I will say is emerging as a positive is that our students are finding their voices. They're recognizing that if they don't know enough about Israel's history and about Zionism, that they need to learn more. And my hope is that, God willing, as the anti-Jewish demonstrations recede, as things get better for our students and all students on campus, that these positive developments will continue, that they will continue to want to learn and to advocate. So I'm going to share a piece of Torah, and then I'm going to conclude. We read this morning about Isaac, the second of the generation, the son of Abraham and Sarah. And the Torah tells us that again and again, Isaac and his servants were trying to dig wells in the land, and there was controversy and there was conflict until finally they dug a well. And the place was called Rehovot, which means widening, the wide place. Why? Ki atah yochiv Adonai lanu ufarinu ba'aretz, because now God made room for us, and we will be fruitful in the land. By continuing his positive pattern of behavior, by Isaac continuing to try to dig and to try and to build, he created an opening which God was able to expand. And by the way, Rehovot, it's still a big city in Israel, and that's the location of the Weizmann Institute. So that has been a place of widening in terms of scientific knowledge that benefits not just Israelis, but the entire world. God willing, all of the horrific crises that are facing Israel in particular, but the Jewish community, the worldwide, will one day be behind us. But I hope that the good things that have emerged, the unity, the sense of responsibility that some within the Palestinian community have expressed, the sense of urgency and commitment that our college students, who we should be incredibly proud of, have expressed and demonstrated, that all of that will continue. And that, I'll give Hanan Ben Ari the last word, when all of this is over, we won't be exactly as we were. Shabbat Shalom.